my veins. Blue and one, I red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm Bulldog born. Bulldog, that's my breed. I was born to follow where the Bulldogs lead.
Okay, welcome back to Inside the Kennel podcast. I loved introducing this blokes, the great Bulldogs captain. They struck a statue in his honour. They named a wing after him. 350 AFL games of football. Dougie, love seeing you, love hearing from you. Dougie Hawkins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Matty. Lovely to be on board, boys. Who we got this time? Who are we talking
You got,
about?
Matty?
We've got Laurie Sandilands.
Wow.
Yeah, Laurie, he ended up captaining the club. I think it was just before your time. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah, correct, Matty. Just before my time, I arrived in 78, which is now 45 years ago. Is that right?
Crazy.
Does that sound right?
That can't be right.
78 to 23, yeah, for 45 years ago.
Ridiculous.
Can you believe that? No, he did. And I remember Laurie Sandilands playing. He came from the same club as my cousin, Terry Wilkins, who played in the early 70s at Footscray, went to Melbourne, played later at Sandringham in those VFA days. And I remember Laurie Sandilands coming from West Footscray. I remember number 9 on his back. Does that sound right, Paul, Matty? That sounds right.
Number 9 he started with number 36 in his first year and he took over number 9. That's right.
And what I remember about him was his ability, particularly when he played forward, because you know what, he played back too. He played in the back line as well. I'm sure he played back as well. But I remember his attack on the footy. He was brutal. He just ran straight at it. I'll never forget it. I'll never get him coming out of full forward. And he had the shorts up, the red shorts back in those days, and had the chest, he had the barrel chest. And Laurie Sandilands just ran straight at the footy. And I remember this bloke just bang, beautiful kick for goal as well. And then I remember him playing in the back line. Is that right?
Yeah, so he started as a defender.
He started defender.
And Bob Rose came along and turned him around, pretty much the opposite of Rick Kennedy, who started forward and went back, as you alluded to earlier. So that's this happens, I guess, and it was the making of him.
Yeah. So Matty, Paul, I'm pretty sure he captained the club for a few years, did he?
Yes.
Laurie,
3 years, 3 or 4.
He captained a few years as well. But he was just, again, I might sound like a broken record. He had a good pair of hands, and you know what he was? He was tough. He was tough. He wouldn't take a backward step with anybody. If you want to rock and roll and play up, guess what? Laurie Sandilands, he would take you on. I remember that as a kid, stand there at the Western Oval, Whitten Oval. I remember watching him. He wouldn't take one backward step, Laurie Sandilands. And, again, you're right, Matty. Poor, I missed him only by that year. I think he went to Collingwood in 77. But my memory as a kid watching Laurie Sandilands was tack on the footy, good kick, could play back, could play forward, and he was genuine tough.
Dougie, that's in an era when everyone was pretty tough, wasn't it? That's when an era and not too many took a backward step, so he must have been outstandingly courageous, was he?
Yeah, you're right, Paul. Well, they were. I mean, but he was pretty tough there, in particularly the early mid-70s when he started from West Footscray then. So how many games would he have played? Would he get about 150 odd, Matty? Would he have played that many, you reckon? Would he have played? I'm not sure if he played 150, 200. I know he played over probably a 10-year period.
Yeah, it was 164 games.
164.
Yeah, absolutely. So he started in 1978. He ended up, he ended in 1978.
What year did he start, Matty? What year did he start?
66, the year the Saints
66.
Wow.
I must have good memory. I was only 6. But it was later. It was later more when I was, 10 years of age. And when Terry, my cousin, went there, I started going to the footy a lot more at the Western Oval, which was now the Whitten Oval. But that's a fair few games. That's 160 odd games. And I'll just say it again, Laurie Sandilands, he was captain. He was hard at the footy. And he was a bloke that you get behind and support and back because he led from the front. He was terrific.
Yeah, beautiful. Fantastic, Doug. Well, guess what?
He's not there, is he?
That's him ringing.
Send my love to Sandy. They call him Sandy. Send my love to Sandy. Go on, you Sandy.
not knocking Dougie. He's banging that door down.
Oh,
like
look,
Rick
there we
Nicky.
go. He's coming in. I'm going. See you, boys.
Thanks, Dougie.
Hey, Matty, Paul. See you,
Hey,
boys.
Dougie, thanks, mate.
Ladies and gentlemen, he flew like Aaron Norton and fought like Barry Hall. He had the grace of Simon Beasley. We're talking about none other than 4-time Footscray leading goal kicker, club captain, Big V wearer. It's Leaping Laurie Sandilands, ladies and gents.
G'day, Matty. Thank you very much. That's a lovely introduction.
Absolutely. Well, you've got a lot of accolades, that's for sure, and we can't wait to share that with our fans. I want to start by just asking you, Laurie, could you, in your own words, tell us a little bit about you as a player? For those who didn't get to see you play, how would you describe yourself as a player?
Once I was motivated by Bob Rose, I suppose I just tried my hardest to do the best I could and play it as hard as I could. The reason I say that is because the first 6 or 7 years I was there, and Teddy Whitten was coach, and Charlie Sutton were my two coaches. And I had a lot of distractions. I was going through tertiary college doing a science degree, and so I wasn't getting a lot of training, wasn't getting a lot of footy, and wasn't getting a lot of direction from the coaches or anything. And it wasn't until Bob Rose came in '72 that he just sat me down and said, "This is what I expect of you as a player and as a footballer." And he also laid out some paths forward. I guess he said, "You got potential to be captain of the club."
Wow.
It was just lovely. He said, "But you get reported too much." He said, "You've got to get that out of your game. You've got to play consistently. You've got to get more kicks than you're getting." And just, as I said, laid out a pathway for me to progress, and I responded very much to that. And I think that was certainly the prime years that I had, and the years you just mentioned, and the goal kicking and representing Victoria, being captain, all happened under Bob Rose. So I was very fortunate, I guess, that we had a great rapport.
Marvellous. And before you even reached the club, I'm right in saying that your family grew up in Footscray. You're a local boy, Alcedon, yeah. And you grew up idolising the club. Can you tell us a little bit about one of your early interactions? I understand you went down to the club and met some of the heroes of that era.
That's right. Yeah, my uncle Jim Greenham was a past player, life member of the club, Victorian representative in the 40s, played in the 40s. I grew up from my first memory of football was sitting on my father's shoulders in 1954 down at the Footscray Town Hall when all the premiership players come out. And I remember seeing Charlie Sutton dressed in the mayoral robes. Then I remember Charlie playing. So that was my early introduction. And, in the backyard, I was always going to be Teddy Whitten or Johnny Schultz or someone like, kicking the ball, doing marvellous evasive work around my sisters who just stood there and let me do it, I suppose. And so it was about the age, I was about the age of 10, I think, somewhere around 1958, 59, thereabouts. And my uncle took me down to the football and got me into the rooms before the game. And I went in there, and I can still remember the dark room and the rubbing tables and the sawdust on the floor and the massive hypnotic smell of eucalyptus and whatever. And went in, and I was introduced to Jimmy Gallagher, who was might have been his last year or something. And then he took me up and introduced me to the great man, Teddy Whitten. And Ted was, just lovely with kids and lovely with me and everything. And I think I always wanted to play football for Footscray. That was my life's ambition as a kid. And I think that's probably the day I really became committed to doing it. It was almost that I was predestined to go along that path from there. Yeah.
Incredible. And I understand as a 15-year-old, you went down to the club for a trial. Is that correct? And then proceeded into the under 18s or 19s, and then en route to the senior squad as well.
That's right, Matt. Ever since the 50s, Melbourne was zoned, so I was zoned to Footscray, which, as it turned out, was terrific for me. But I started playing football with West Footscray.
Right.
And I was in the under-16s. So midway through the season, I was contacted by the football club and Norm Gardner, who was coach of the under-19s. And at that stage, I was playing under-16s in the morning and then going and playing the under-18s in the afternoon. And
Wow.
Norm Gardner suggested that to play 2 games in one day just to satisfy my ability was, counterproductive. And so they asked me to go down to the under-19s. So I was in 1965 and I played the last 7 games of that year in the under-19s. And I'd also played in the practice matches, I think, that year. But, just as a young kid, got a taste of what it was like. Played in the under-19s, went back, played in the finals for West Footscray. And then the next year, I was invited to go to pre-season. And I was 16 then, that's right. And I made the supplementary list they had, which is, I guess, like the VFL now as opposed to VFA. I was made the supplementary list, or could have been a rookie list, I suppose. And then I played in the reserves that year. And then the last 7 or the last 6 or 7 games that year, I made 19th man for the North Melbourne game. And Dave Darcy was fullback. He came off injured at half time, and I got my first run then at Arden Street in a very cold July afternoon, wet and muddy, and that's how I started off. Yeah.
Unbelievable. So your first game, you're standing next to Ian Bryant, I understand, and he was sort of coaching you through from the back pocket, standing next to you, and also, am I right in saying that one of your teachers was actually playing for North Melbourne?
That's correct. Yeah, and I went to North Footscray State School. So I was born in Seddon, but lived a drop kick and a stab pass from the ground in Suffolk Road, West Maidstone. It was the other side of the road was West Footscray. Yes. And went to North Footscray State School, and John Waddington was the who played for North Melbourne. He was a senior teacher there and also the sports master. So I had a bit of a grounding under John. And then lo and behold, some years later, and I think it was John's last year, but it was the first game in 1966, and I sort of waddled up to him at 3/4 time. Hello, John.
Hello.
And yeah, he said, "Oh, Laurie," and wished me all the best and everything. And yeah, so that was when I said, I guess I make you feel old, and but it was very interesting for a teacher to have one of his students come through and actually play against him. Was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Incredible. So 1966, you're a young teenager and playing and surrounded by your idols. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, as a little kid, you're sort of looking up at Ted Whitten. Suddenly, you're thrust into a Bulldog Guernsey. Tell us a little bit about the feeling and the emotions around that, and also some of the I guess some of your heroes that you then became teammates and actually bonded with.
Yeah, well, as you said, that first game, Ian Bryant was just so good, but it was very difficult. Just to set the scene, the first game, I was so nervous, as you can imagine. I just couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything. Just then all these doubts come into your mind. Am I good enough? Why did they pick me? And so on and so forth. But anyway, I went out and thoroughly enjoyed my first game. And Ian, as I said, was so helpful and so supportive. But then, as I said, you've got guys like Teddy Whitten, Johnny Schultz. In fact, all of them were. Johnny McKenzie. He also went to Footscray Tech and did a chemistry degree, so we had a bit of a rapport there. And then there were the guys, Gary Merrington, who I'd come up through the under-19s with. He was playing at the same time. I got to know Kevin Delmenico, and it was a very close-knit club in those days, the player-wise, but it was also very difficult playing with guys like Ted Whitten and John Schosner, because the ball would be kicked in your direction, and there was Ted, and instead of going for the ball, you just stand there and watch it, and Ted will get yours. Ted always gets the ball, and
wow.
Yeah, so, and he'd turn around and give you this filthy look. And so it takes a while to sort of blend into that sort of environment where you are playing with your heroes and people you're in awe of and you know, actually contribute in your own manner into the game. Yeah, it's a very strange feeling, it is.
Yeah, amazing. So you talked a little bit about being a fullback or a defender in your early days before Bobby Rose came about. It wasn't until your 8th game that you kicked your first goal, first of 228 goals for the Dogs. Your first one came through. Can you remember your first goal against Carlton?
I can remember I got it, and as I took the mark, I cramped. And I just got rid of the cramp, and then I kicked a torpedo, and the cramp hit again. So I didn't actually see it go through the goals. I just fell to the ground, grabbing hold of my leg, and the torp just torped its way right through the middle of the goals, apparently. But I think that might have been the first goal I kicked there.
Magnificent. Oh, what an amazing one. Well, hopefully we can find some footage of that. There's limited footage of you in your heyday. But some of the goals you did kick, you just appeared to be a prodigious kick. Were there any? Could you tell me your bronze, silver, and gold, your 3 top goals that you kicked in your career? I'm putting you on the spot here to sort of recall those. Can you recall some amazing ones that stick in your mind?
There's one I kicked out at Waverley. In fact, I had a couple of good days out at Waverley, but one of them was against Hawthorn, and Calvin Moore kicked it out, and I couldn't have been. I might have been playing on the half-forward flank anyway. He kicked it out from fullback and kicked it out of bounds. So I just picked it up and went back and laid into a torpedo, and it went back over his head through the goals. It must have been 60, 70 yards, I think, and it was a one I do remember. And then I had a purple patch at Waverley against Geelong, and I kicked 9 goals. And 8 of which came in the second half. And I was just, I could have kicked them with my backside. It was one of those days. And a couple I let out, marked the ball, turned around. I turned around and I actually short passed it to Barry Round, who was standing in the goal square. And the short pass was such that it went sailing over his head from about 70 yards out and went through the goal. I sort of think of, as opposed to a single goal, there were days when I kicked, a bundle of goals. I had a very good day on David Dench once. He's always a very hard, tough customer. I kicked 7 against North Melbourne one day. You kick them, and that was my job. When I was put up forward, I sort of fall forward and just paid to kick them.
Absolutely.
Not paid much.
No, imagine if you were there today and you were a leading goal kicker for 4 years for the club. You'd be on some top dollars, that's for sure. But I guess there was a bit of a grind during 1966 to 1970. Having a look at the club's success rate. There was some lean times there before Bobby Rose came along. Can you remember those years and how that was for you personally, and also for the club going through some pretty tricky years there?
It was tough, and I think as a not so much a hangover, but as a fact of life, there were 3 very dominant personalities in the football club. There was Jack Collins, Teddy Whitten, and Charlie Sutton. Yes. And whilst Charlie, and Ted, and Jack were all great contributors to the club and all that, they all have these very dominant personalities, and it was never a happy club. I think, there's a lot of, just a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the players as to the way they were treated. Our training regime sometimes, things like that. And to be successful, and I think that was proven in 2016, that it starts with a very, very solid administration who can get on with and communicate with the players and the staff and whatever. And I think all the time that during the club's, my tenure at the club, that really didn't exist too much. In the mid-70s, there was a bit of coordination and cohesion for a while, and that was good. But then at the end of the 70s, it blew itself apart again, unfortunately. And it wasn't until the late 90s that, that progression to having everything perfect in order to win a premiership took place. Yeah,
really interesting to hear that. So tell us a little bit about I guess, a changing guard. So 1971 came along, and Bobby Rose, who you mentioned, has arrived. What was the transformation that he brought to your game particularly? Obviously, you know, you moved to the forward line, but how did that sort of become, you know, such a launch pad for you? And was there a particular game that you just said to yourself, "I've arrived"?
No, I don't think that. Getting back to what I said beforehand, I was never given any direction by a coach, and they tended to leave me. I was a fairly fiery personality from the time I got there, and I was a bit of a wild boy. I had a bit of Dougie Hawkins characteristics in me. I like to drink, and so I was never the favourite man in the committee, you know, because of my lifestyle. But when I was dropped, or when something like that happened, I was never approached and said, "This is what we expect you to do. This is what we want you to do. This is where you're going." They left me alone, and I think they were a bit scared of me. And I know one of the reserves coaches, they always terrorised when I was dropped and come down to the seconds. "Oh, Jesus, we've got to put up with Laurie again and his moods." But never was I ever, you know, controlled on that basis or whatever. Bob Rose came and sat me down and said, you know, and just looked me in the eye and didn't put up with any of my crap, basically, and said, "You're not getting enough kicks. You know, you've got to make up your mind whether you want to be a footballer, whether you want to be a good footballer, whether you want to be a big part of the team,
Right.
or we'll let you go. You know, your future is in your hands, basically." Look me in the eye. And as I said, I just had a connection with Bob that I didn't have with any other coach. And I went away and thought about it. And that first night, I didn't like Bob a lot because of what he said to me. But I guess a little bit to my credit and also to Bob's. But I sat down and I thought, you know, he's right. Everything he said about me and what I'm doing are the defects in my game. And so from there, I tried. And I guess at some stage I was determined I would be the best player I could be. And so the first year you know, his first target was said, "You've got to play at least 20 games this year." That would have been 73. You've got to play 20 games. And I think I played 21 or 22. And during that season, he said, "You should be captain of this club. Now you prove yourself." And then during the off season, there was a bit of trouble between David Thorpe and Bob and the committee. And Thorpe was sacked. And Bob rang me up and said, "I'd like you to be captain of the club." And then I probably felt I'd arrived, and not that I'd made it, but I think then I thought, I've got a big responsibility now. I've got a huge responsibility, and I must respond and be the best, you know, player I can. Yeah.
Well, you certainly did, by the sounds of things. We're really curious to hear of, you know, that meteoric rise. But before we do, you mentioned that you were a bit of a fiery character, and I'm interested in exploring this a little bit. I understand you were reported no less than 8 times, and there was an incident involving Lee Matthews that got you in the bad books of your own mum at one point. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I must say, except for the one with Lee, I was innocent every time. You know,
yes.
The tribunal took a different view, but yeah, and I vow and declare the bravest thing I ever did on the football field was I swore at Lee Matthews. And Clive Newman, who played with us, hit somebody against Hawthorn and knocked him out, and I ran in and I was saying, "Don't die on our ground, you know, get up," or something. And Lee Matthews ran in. And I said some, you know, these days I'd probably get 12 months suspension for what I said, but I just questioned the marital status of his Italian parents, basically. And anyway, this little boundary umpire ran in and reported me, and I got 2 weeks for obscene language at the tribunal. But my mother came, and she, a very religious woman, my mother, she doesn't mind me kicking them or hitting them or something or getting reported. But she said, "How am I ever going to face those ladies at church again, Laurie? This is an absolute blight on your career. How can I ever go back to my church knowing what you said to Lee Matthews?" Yeah, so it took a long time to live that one down.
Absolutely love it. When you're more fearful of your mum than Lee Matthews, you know.
Oh, terrified of my mum. Yeah, Lee was no Lee was tough, but no, Mum had ripped the skin off you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, 1974, you've just talking about, you've been made captain, and leadership must have agreed with you because you possibly had your greatest season in 74, some would say. You kicked 50 goals, and the team, for the first time since 1961, we made the finals. So can you tell us a little bit about that incredible campaign, not only from your perspective, but also how the team went?
Well, it was a pretty star-studded team. We had, as I said, Barry Round was there. Just going back through that side, when you look at the talent in it, we had Merrington at fullback, Ian Salmon, I think. Bernie Quinlan played centre half back. How good can you be? Ian Salmon, centre half forward. I was either full forward or roving commission. We had Greg Parkover from Melbourne. Then you had guys like Jeff Jennings, Ian Collins, very quick players, Colin Dell, and mainly, a combination of District League boys and Latrobe Valley boys where we recruited them from. And we just sort of clicked. And
you had a pretty handy player in the ruck as well, I understand.
A guy called Dempsey. Yeah. He was, a great mark around the ground. And Brownlow medalist, 75. And I forgot about Gary. Yeah, sorry, Gary. But he was great, particularly as a defensive. That man playing the kick behind the play and whatever. He was very, very strong. Yeah.
Yeah. So a star-studded team there. We proceeded to get to the elimination final. Is that right?
Yeah, we got in those days. There were only the top 5 played finals, and we got into 5th spot.
Right.
And the last game of the season couldn't go in or couldn't go out. Have you got time for a funny story about that? I nearly got Teddy Whitten thrown off radio because the last game of the season, we could win, lose or draw. We couldn't go out of 5th position. And I'd been playing with a pretty dicky knee all year, and I was getting cortisone injections into it to sort of keep it moving. So the Tuesday night, Bobby Rose said, "Look, we're going to rest you this week. We want you to be fit for the final." And that was all right. So I didn't train, and all the guys are out training, and I'm in the medical room, and I've got ultrasound and infrared and ultraviolet rays and heat pads on my knee and towels wrapped up and everything. And I got my knee, obviously being treated. And all the reporters came in, Lou Richards, other guys from The Age and, all the papers. And they said, "You got a crook knee, Laurie." And I said, "No, there's nothing wrong with my knee." And I said, "No, have a look at it." I said, "No." I said, "Actually, what's happened, I've been getting so many kicks lately that I developed a wart on the big toe and I've had it cut off, so I'm not playing." And this was reported, a huge headline, Sandilands out, had a wart removed from his toe. Now, Teddy Whitten, who played with a broken leg, Ted, and, chew up nails and spit out rust. We all know what Ted was like. And Ted was mortified that I should not play because of this wart on my toe. So he's on the radio doing around the grounds with Ian Major and Jack Dyer. And he's talking to the guy next to him, and Ian Major, and the ball's gone over the boundary line, out of bounds. We'll get a quick score from Teddy Whitten. And as he turned on to Teddy Whitten and the microphone, Teddy said to the bloke next to him, "And he's got an effing wart on his foot." And so Ian Major and Jack Dyer just didn't know what to say. And Ian started laughing. And I didn't know anything about this until after the game. Ted Whitten come in and just bowled me over and pushed me. "So you so-and-so," he says, "you got me thrown off radio today. I've sworn on radio and everything." And so that all happened because I made a flippant comment about having a wart on my toe. Yeah.
Well, it must have stuck in Jack Dyer and Ian Major's mind, because I know that you worked for 3KZ a little bit later down the track, which I'm curious to hear about a little later as well. But not good to hear that you've annoyed Teddy, but you would have definitely put a smile on his face, because earlier that year you represented the Big V, which was his passion. Can you
yes.
tell us a little bit about that experience, some of the players you ran alongside, and just how it was to pull on that Guernsey?
Yeah, it was good and it was strange, actually, because Bernie Quinlan had to pull out. He had an injury or something, so I didn't actually get first selection, but so I was a late inclusion, and I think all the team went over on the Monday night or something and trained in Adelaide, and I think no, it was Perth. That's right, over in Perth. And I didn't go over till the Thursday night, so I didn't get there till midnight Thursday night or something. Had a light run Friday. Didn't really get to know any of the guys. There was Bartlett in the side and Dempsey and a lot of others. And I didn't fire up all that well in the game, but we ended up hanging on and winning by a couple of points. I think it was a pretty tough, pretty hard game. Yeah.
Amazing. And can you just pan your camera across to the left and show us that big V jumper that's on your wall? Is that okay?
I shall do, yes. My son, hang on, if I can. Yeah, there it is up there. My son got that mounted for me, and I'm in the man cave, and there's can't see it, a photo on the wall, Gary Dempsey, Bernie Quinlan and myself and Tony Capes. We were the 4 VFL representatives in '74, and then that's a picture of me as captain, and that's one of the rare overhead marks I took there. So they're all up on the wall in my pride of place. Yeah.
Magnificent. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. We'd love to hear a little bit about that, the final, because, Bulldog fans had to wait some 13 years from the 1961 grand final loss to finally taste a little bit of September action. What happens? The wart was removed and you were able to play.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I came up pretty well. Unfortunately, the whole game started and ended very controversially because we went away for Dick came to Bob Rose and said, look, do you think it'd be a good idea if we got away the weekend before and we went down Phillip Island and we just have a get together down there and talk about the game and whatever? And Bob said, yeah, it'd be a good idea. So we finished the last game of the season and went down to Phillip Island, and probably expecting to sit down and talk the game and tactics and whatever, and we did nothing except there was nothing planned, and so all the guys got on the grog, and it was a pretty free and easy weekend, and we came out against Collingwood very underprepared, both physically. I don't think we were expecting the level of pressure, and certainly mentally not prepared. So Collingwood absolutely crunched us, although we had big chances in the first quarter and the first half, and I think we finished at half time with 2-10. So any chance we did have of getting back in the game just dissipated with our dreadful kicking. And Collingwood went on and had I think at that stage, a record victory for an elimination final. So it was a pretty inglorious start to our finals campaign, I have to say that, yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, the preparation doesn't sound great at all. And I understand later in 1974, it might have been in the summer. Am I right in saying you went to the Gold Coast and there was a downpour that put a dampener on the game in more ways than one?
That was an end of season trip. We can be forgiven a bit more for what we did up there, I guess. But yeah, we went up and we played Sandgate. Or at the Sandgate Oval, we played a combined Queensland side, and Billy Ryan had moved up from Geelong. He was playing, and as things do, I live in Queensland now, and as it does up here, when it rains, it doesn't mess around. So we were in Surfers Paradise on the Saturday night having a few drinks, and Bob Rose suggested we get to bed by at least 11 o'clock, so we'd be in some sort of shape to play the game the next day. And it absolutely poured, and I think I got to bed about midnight, and I was the first one in bed, and everyone else staggered in at some hours after that. Anyway, we woke up on the Sunday morning ready to go to Sandgate, and the word come through they'd had 8 inches of rain overnight. And this has been the days before climate change, so I don't know how you get that, but the ground was flooded, and we were told it was called off. So we went straight back to the bar and got into the grog, and then we were informed that the game was in fact on, that the ground would, it was playable. So then we all got into the bus in various stages of sobriety or lack thereof, and went to Sandgate and proceeded to play the game. and won. Yeah.
And I heard that that you didn't have a bad afternoon as well.
No, I think I kicked. They kept kicking it to me. I didn't want them, but they'd made a pact. I think they'd kick it. I kicked 9 or 10 goals, something like that. And the first one, I said I'd had a few drinks, and the first mark I took, I went to kick the ball and totally missed it, I think. So it's probably one of my greatest goal kicking efforts ever. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, 1975 came around, and it was a season, I guess, that had great hope attached to it. It was in round 2, and I'm not sure if you feel comfortable talking about this, but
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
A very tragic turn of events happened.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit from your perspective, Laurie?
Yeah, well, we'd recruited very heavily over the summer. I think we got Featherby, we got Neil Saxey from South Australia, and we got a couple of other. Anyway, they were the main ones that came across. And Neil was a pretty hard and tough character. He certainly demanded his space on the ground, and I was working. At the end of '74, I was approached to become promotions officer of the club, where I could work full time at the club and get fitter and spend all my time at the club. So I was there working for the club. Neil came in and they gave him a job with the club too, because there weren't millions of jobs around then. So Neil and I worked together, and we trained together as well. And the funny thing was when we got on the track, when there was circle work, Bob would say, pick a partner, and you'd pick somebody to go against. And everyone had run away from Neil. And then I'd look around, and Neil and I were the only two left. So we always played together, the circle work and whatever. And, it became almost a two-man war, unintentionally, but that's just the way it did, because we're both pretty hard at the ball and come off with cut eyes and sore jaw or whatever. And we had a great relationship. And then the week before Neil had his accident, we had a call from the Austin Hospital. There was a young guy in there had a car accident, and Neil and I went in to see him. He'd become paraplegic as a result of this car accident, and we went in and gave him a footy and a scarf, and there was a photographer there. And as we were walking out, I said to Neil, I think I'd rather be dead than end up in this place. And Neil said, yeah. Wow. Because we're looking at we're in the spinal unit. And lo and behold, the next week, Neil had his fateful accident. And the next time, we went to the Austin Hospital that night and it was confirmed that he'd broken his neck. And then the next time I saw Neil, he was lying in the Austin Hospital in the spinal unit. Yeah. That's
incredible. I never knew, the build up to that. And
it was a very fateful.
Yeah. How confronting. I know that you kicked 8 goals in that game, and Neil himself had taken 10 marks that had happened in only his second game.
And it's on YouTube. I think you can watch the whole of the 4 quarters, and you can just see as the game developed how he just picked up the pace of the game and started to become such a dominant player. And had a terrific game, and then just in the blink of an eyelid, things changed. Yeah.
What sort of player do you think he could have been, Laurie?
Could have been anything. I think he would certainly have been a champion. He would. He came over with a big reputation, and I think he would have enhanced that in Victorian football, because he had that dedication and desire. And he would have been great.
You're on the record for saying that that accident had a real big impact on you and how you were able to carry on in your career. Obviously, you continued to play for the Dogs for 2 more seasons after that, and then on for the Magpies. How did those last 2 years at the Dogs go for you personally?
They were a struggle. After about. And I was very good friends with Tony Capes, who was one of our directors and also, a medical doctor. And we talked a lot about it. But the players weren't affected until about 6 to 8 weeks after the injury. There was a lot of hype around let's play, let's win for Neil and so forth. But as the time wore on, it just affected some of us, and it affected me very deeply. And it was actually something I couldn't talk about until Neil passed away a couple of years ago during COVID, and we had a podcast. There was Ross Abbey, Peter Welsh, Graham Joslin, a number of, about 10 of us on the podcast. And I actually very close to broke down again and just said, look, all these years I've held it all in, just how it affected me, how I and couldn't talk to anybody about it because, I never considered the problems I had. Anything I said would be sort of cheating or almost disrespectful to Neil for what he went through. But it sort of, up until that stage, I felt invincible. And I guess most players do. You just feel no one can hurt me, no one can do anything to me. I can just do what I want. And that was shattered in that time. And then, as I said, every game became a struggle. And there was one game towards the end of that, or might have even been the next year, that I went for the ball and I was probably 30 yards clear of anyone. I went down to pick it up and I just froze.
Oh,
and I
wow.
couldn't pick it up. And I thought, you're in real trouble, and I knew from that time, my time was limited, and and I think I played a couple of games then, and a couple with Collingwood, and just sort of faded away. Then, give it away. Yeah.
What a trauma for you to have, encountered yourself, and to to keep on soldiering on, is a real testament to you in many ways, and your teammates, because that's an horrendous thing to to experience and be a part of, and particularly such a close mate and teammate. So despite that, in '76, the team went on to make the finals again. Right in saying, and we did get bundled out again, so we were unsuccessful in the entire 1970s, that decade, to win a final. But tell us about that experience running back out onto the, I guess it was the MCG, and
no, it was Waverley. Both our elimination finals, 74, 76, are out at VFL Park out at Waverley. So we never actually got to play a final on the MCG, which was a disappointment. But we played Geelong the 76, and we were in it right till the end. And Larry Donoghue was playing. He kicked his 100th goal early in the second quarter, I think. And then there was enormous pressure for him to, and they were feeding the ball down to him. And I was full back, and he eventually got his 100th goal. I think he kicked 4 that day. But once he kicked the ball, the pressure was off, and we were able to get back in the game. And I think right up until midway through the last quarter, we may have been in front. I'm not too sure, but we were certainly in with a chance. And I think they ended up winning by 8 points or something like that. So pretty close, and a much more contest worthy of a final than the previous one against Collingwood was.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess there was optimism after that, but I think it may have been until 1985 when our next final. So I might be right in saying that, but there's a lean period, that's for sure. And Bulldog supporters must have been tough and resilient to stick with us during that time. But but you yourself, a man that bled for the red, white, and blue, you're out the door at the end of 1977. What happened? How did you come to leave?
Well, it's my biggest regret in football, but the club blew itself apart again. After then, there was trouble. The president had locked out the social club the end of 75, I think it was. There was turmoil. There was the club had lost a record amount of money in 75 because all the efforts went into raising money for Neil. There's no insurance or anything then. So all the club's fundraising activities went to try and form some sort of financial assistance for Neil. So the club lost $100,000, I think, which in 75 was a massive loss of money. And then trouble came into the club. And there were other things happened after that. So the end of, when I was 77, things had got to, and as I said, I'd been working at the club. And I was involved with half of the board of directors and got involved in the club politics against the president at the time. And anyway, Ray Hubbart's, his contract wasn't renewed, and the way they, and this is the single biggest regret I've ever had in football, but I'll tell you the whole story because it's all relevant. Ray Hubbart's was given a clear, or his contract wasn't renewed, and they sent him a letter and said, we're not going on with your contract. You got 2 weeks to get out of your house. Oh. So Ray went to the papers, of course, and complained, or told them the story, how badly he'd been treated. And they said, is there anyone who'll back you up? You know, anyone from the club would give you. And so he said, well, why don't you give Laurie Sandilands a call? And as luck would have it, they gave me a call that night, and I'd had about 400 beers. And I'm quite, you know, quite incoherent almost. And so they told me what happened, and I've given the club the greatest spray you ever could, you know. And I got to cop it. As I said, I was drunk. They rang me up. I was very unhappy with the club, and that's what happened. So the headlines the next day were bigger than when World War III was, or II was declared, I think. And I woke up and I thought, this is not going to be a good day. So then I got a telegram from the club. I've got to go down front the board and everything. And so I've had this impasse with the president, and I wouldn't back down and they wouldn't back down. And the end result was they gave me an open clearance. Right. And so I then retired. I didn't want to play with anyone else. I thought, if you're going to do that to me, I'll just give it away. But Tommy Hafey was coach of Collingwood at the time, and Tom just wouldn't leave me alone. I'd go to work and he'd be sitting in my chair and in my office. And I'd go to have lunch at lunchtime and he'd drive back in again. You know, just every day, 2 or 3 times a day, there was Tommy Hafey. And he just wore me down. And in the end, I said, look, I'll give it a try. So I went to Collingwood. And then Bill Goggin resigned and Donnie McKenzie was taken on as coach. And I got a call from Donnie McKenzie, and I went back down to the club. And Donnie McKenzie was there, Teddy Witt and Charlie Sutton. They said, look, we want you to come back. We want you to come back. And, you know, I didn't leave. And during this time, my wife was getting death threats, you know, from the phone and whatever. It was a real bad time. And anyway, I said, look, I'll think about coming back. And so I went home that night, and then I got a call from all the board members that I'd sort of sided with. And they said, Laurie, you can't come back. You'll lose all your credibility. Wow. You know, if you come back, you know, you've lost us. And all. So I'm in this absolute impasse. What do? Do I go to Collingwood? Do I go back to Footscray and lose all the support I got from the, what do I made a decision that night. I said, bugger it, I'm going to Collingwood. So I went to Collingwood, and it was the wrong decision, but it's the decision I had to make that night, sort of thing. And wow. So I played 4 games with Collingwood and then just stopped going. Wow.
So that's the mother of all hangovers, I think, to wake up.
Oh, yeah, that's a good reason not to drink, that one. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So you wound up at the Magpies, you know, despite, you know, your internal voice is probably saying do not do that, but it happened. There's you know, looking at your history there, I saw a really interesting game. It may have been your 2nd or 3rd game for the Pies. You returned to the Kennel, Collingwood jumper, and the Dogs were up by about 5 goals at 3/4 time, and then enter one Laurie Sandilands playing for Collingwood. Can you tell us what happened in that last quarter and the result?
I'll tell you about the whole game, yeah, because I got there and I went and I was talking to some of the Footscray guys before the game and the trainers, because I love the trainers, they were always good guys. And I said, look, this is a silly question, but where's the visitors' rooms? And they said, over there. And so I went into the visitors' rooms and you know, got changed, ran out on the ground, and Dick Collinson had put a bounty on the head. He'd offered $500 to anybody who could knock me out. So, you know, Dempsey was after me and a few others are after me, I think. So yeah, that was all funny. And yeah, the last score, you said we were down a bit and we just got a bit of a rush on. I got a couple of goals. I think I kicked 3 that day. I got one early. I might have got a couple in the last quarter. And then the second last kick of the day, I just picked the ball up and kicked it forward. And Craig Stewart marked it and turned around, kicked the goal. And as he kicked the goal, the siren went and we got up by 3 points, or 2 or 3 points, I think it was. So then I've run off the ground and I saw my chief adversary up in the stand, and I'm going, yeah, stick it up, you know, and all that. And I've run straight up the Footscray race.
Yeah, do not turn around or stop.
Straight up the Footscray race I've gone, and they stopped me and said, you better get out of here. So I turned around, went back up the Collingwood race. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mount mistake. I imagine there would have been about 30,000 angry Bulldog supporters as well. Just saying what's gone on here. The hero has turned villainous on that day, I guess.
It was very much an empty feeling. I surprised. I think I got a few boos and Bronx cheers, but I didn't. I didn't get a reception I thought I might have got. But I think. Mainly because people knew how dedicated and how committed I was and how my whole career and life had been associated with Footscray, that whatever had happened at the club that I ended up with, Collingwood, was not necessarily where I needed or wanted to be. And I think there was probably a sympathetic vote for me in the crowd that day.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, your stats would back that up because, you actually gave away more free kicks than any other game in your entire career. You gave 6 free kicks to the Bulldogs that day, so you obviously wanted to try and get us across the line. Did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that. No.
So there you are. So your career ended after, I think, was it 4 games at the Pies?
Yeah.
And you retired. And I understand that you couldn't keep away from the Bulldogs. You did return.
I did, and it was due to Charlie Sutton, who, Charlie over his whole career, if there was a trouble in the club, he was great at, building and mending bridges. And he called me down after the season and sat me down and said, look, we know what's going on, and so on. We'd love you to come back as chairman of selectors. Would you consider that? And
wow.
That was the greatest. It enabled me to come back and do all the things I wanted. And I didn't play again, of course, but I was able in my own way to repay a bit, I suppose, of what the club had given to me and what I wanted to put back into club. And that's where I wanted to end up. I'm so grateful to Charlie that he was big enough and that sort of strength of character to I think he knew I never wanted to leave. I think Charlie knew that. And he got me back, and I was chairman of selectors with Donnie McKenzie and Brucey Burgoyne, who was reserve coach for that year.
Yeah, well, what a fantastic way to mend some of those bridges and just reconnect with the club that you absolutely love, and you can hear that in your voice with every word.
Still love them, yeah.
I still love them, absolutely. So, can you tell me, the love for some of the people that really loom large, in terms of your most loved teammates and most admired players, right through your career and even through, I guess, the time as a selector, who jumps out at you?
Oh, so many of them. I think as a man and as a great mate, and Barry Round and I, early days were inseparable, and very sad that he passed away, earlier this year. I miss Barry a lot. We had a lot to do up here with the Aussie Rules Club. Barry was president, and there are a contingent of Bulldog players who go every month. So Barry sadly missed. I loved him. Gary Merrington, as I said, I come up through the under-19s and whatever. And Gary was always a funny man, very funny. And then Ross Abbey, Peter Welsh, Graham Joslin, those guys I've mentioned. Stevie Power, Gordon Casey, Les Bartlett. Les is there on the past players committee. All of those guys were my contemporaries. And Ian Salmon, I loved Ian. We didn't see enough or the best of Ian. He was a farm boy at heart and, great guy. So all those guys I enjoyed. And then, as I said, there were the guys from the past, because I started in the 60s, and then there were the Ian Bryants, Teddy Whitten, Johnny Schultz's, Johnny Gillard was still playing then. So they were my heroes and the legends, and the other guys were my contemporaries and the one I looked at. Jeff Jennings, he just such a talented player, and and so on. And as we mentioned before, Gary Dempsey, just a great player for the club. So and then it takes a long time after you finish playing to become a supporter again, but at some stage that happened. And early in their careers, I'd see that Rowan Smith and Brad Johnson were just such electric players, and they had pace and they had long kicks. They could destroy a defence. And, then Chris Grant come down. Gary Merrington was the recruiting officer then. Chris Grant and a couple of others. I think Leon Cameron, that's who I'm trying to think of. Got those sort of guys coming. And that was a terrific team they had in the mid-90s, and very close to winning a premiership then. Yeah, just missed.
Yeah, 92, 97, 98, sweet seasons, I guess, like you've described in, the 74, 76, the upward charge towards finals, but you just have to turn up in September, don't you? And they don't just give them away. Oh
no, they don't give them away. That's for sure. It's another level of pressure and intensity, and I was never lucky enough to play a grand final, but there's another one there, another level there. Yeah, our boys have experienced, which was great to see.
I want to ask you about that in a moment, but before I do, are there any? What's your greatest game? If you look back, your best individual performance. I know you kicked bags of 8 and 9. Were they your pinnacle games, or was there a game that stood out in your mind as the best?
Yeah, they were. I think one. I played a couple at the Western Oval. Always played some good ones, but we did play. It probably was 74 at the MCG. We played Richmond, who were the premiers previous year, and whatever. And we had a terrific game against them. I kicked a few goals and, really contributed hard all day. I did a big chase down of somebody on the wing and ended up getting the ball and getting it back for us. Just a lot of that pressure stuff I was talking about before. That probably stands out as the game because it was on the MCG. I think there were 70-odd thousand people there. It was the biggest crowd I played in front of. We were playing a renowned top side, and up till sort of midway through the last quarter, we were right in it, and then they just went away a bit. But that was a very memorable game for me. Yeah.
Yeah, magnificent to hear, Laurie. Before we wrap up, we always ask our guests, and this is putting you on the spot, to enter a 60-second quiz. It's a Bulldog quiz, and there's a leaderboard. And Dougie Hawkins sits at the top of the leaderboard at the moment. There's a grand prize at the end. It's a sketched action picture of our winner, and it might be you, Laurie.
Yeah.
So we're going to ask you to indulge us with 60 seconds. We're going to give you 2 categories, and you can select which one you'd prefer to play with. So you can choose the 1970s as the theme, or goal-kicking Bulldogs. Which takes your fancy?
Goal-kicking Bulldogs, I think. That sounds good.
Fantastic. Goal-kicking Bulldogs it is. All right, so we'll tally your score up at the end. Hope you do fantastically well. See if you can knock off Dougie off the list here. Time will start after I ask the first question. So good luck, Laurie. Your time starts now. Albie Morrison was the first Bulldog to kick 10 goals in a VFL match. Is that true or false?
That would be false.
It's true. It was 1928. Peter Foster scored 10 goals in his first ever reserves match for the club. Is that true or false?
I reckon that's false.
It's true. Tom Boyd was the leading goal kicker in the Bulldogs 2016 premiership year. Is that true or false?
Tom Boyd. No, that's false.
False. It was Stringer. Round 1 in 1989. Which player kicked 8 goals on debut?
8 goals in 1989.
Round 1.
Right. Georgiadis?
Oh, you got it. Which player won the club's goal kicking 17 years apart, 1951, and then he won it in 68? Former teammate of yours.
51 and 68. Donny McKenzie?
That was Teddy Whitten. In
Oh.
1963, Merv Hobbs. And which other player shared the highest goal kicking award for that season with 16 goals? Merv and who?
Merv Hobbs, and I'll say Whitten again.
It was Georgie Bissett. And just as the time stops here, we'll get a chance to ask the last question, so don't worry.
I've got one so far.
Let's see how you go with this last one. Which Bulldog has recorded the most total goals in their debut season? He actually kicked 51. You mentioned him before.
51.
In 1990, he kicked 51 goals.
Brad Johnson.
It's Chrissy Grant.
Who?
Chris Grant.
Chris Grant. That's right. Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah, he kicked 51. And, I think you said Gary Merrington picked him up and also Leon Cameron, which was a fantastic boon for the club.
Yeah, sure was.
Yep.
I should have picked the other category, I think.
Yeah, we get you on next time. Don't worry about that. So Laurie, let me calculate the scores now. They're coming up on your screen. And there it is. Laurie, you're not quite at the top of the leaderboard. But
no, I should have known Albie Morrison. I should have known that one. Yeah, 1928.
1928, absolutely.
However, I remember, and I had the pleasure of knowing Albie Morrison. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What was he like?
Oh, lovely man. Yeah. In fact, if you go back, the players who played in the 60s, there was still a big connection with the guys who played in those 20s and also the association days. There were a couple of guys. Dolly Akerd was there. He was a drink steward, and a guy called Sid Trimble, drink steward. Siddy played or was on the committee in the association days. Dolly played through the association into the 25s, and that Albie Morrison, as you said, 28. They played, and they're all those players. Joey Ryan, so many of them. Normie Ware, 41 Brownlow. They were all still around the club in the 60s, and so there's fantastic history of the Bulldogs, and the players and the past players always wanted to be around the club. And I'd like to think if I lived in Melbourne now, I've been up in Gold Coast for years, but I'd like to think I'd be a Dolly Akerd or a Siddy Trimble and shuffling around the rooms, dishing out soft drinks to the boys or something. There's just something about the Bulldog Club that you never leaves you.
Yeah, well, Johnny Schultz loves doing that even to this day as well.
Yeah.
So how important is that baton passing on, that connection between the past and the present? I know, Luke Beveridge, the coach, talks a lot about our history and how important it is to take it, understand that Footscray lineage. How important do you think that is in our success?
I think it's very, very important. And I think that's why we've got such a terrific and dynamic past players association. But what I was just saying then, the guys who are playing now, they're the last link with the 54 side, because as time, the next few years, we won't have a 54 side representative anymore. So these guys, are the last links there. And hopefully they're, the 54 guys are still able to get to the ground or get to see the players occasionally and meet them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we do these podcasts. It's honouring and remembering, the stories from our past champions, yourself included, Laurie. And we'd love you to end this podcast by telling us how would you like to be remembered? And have you got a final message, I guess, for Bulldog fans as well watching?
Well, as I said, I'd like to be remembered as a guy who played it hard, who played for the team. Personal accolades weren't as important as a team victory. And I'd like to think I was respected for the way I played the game, not from other players, but from the Footscray supporters, that I had that Bulldog spirit and I gave everything I had, and if I come off the ground and I'd done what I had to do or could do. Yeah. Stick with the Bulldogs. It's a cyclical thing. We're enjoying some good success at the moment. We're on the verge of getting another premiership. But just stick with them. This is the greatest club in the league. There's no doubt about that. And we've got the greatest supporters in the league. Absolutely.
Magnificent. Well, we are absolutely honoured to have had an opportunity to speak with you today. I know my co-host, Paul, couldn't be with us today. He's taken off with Dougie to do a little bit of opposition club analysis, but I got to work one-on-one solo with you, which has been, an absolute privilege and an honour. So
likewise, mate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Laurie Sandilands.
Thank you, everybody.
Red in my heart, white in my veins, blue in my eye, red, white, and blue in my brain.